Hello everyone, and welcome to week 6 of English 121. This week we're going to be doing a lot of stuff. This week we're going to be learning about theme, and we're going to be focusing closely in on the author Flannery O'Connor. You're going to read selections from chapter 6 on theme and watch the video on theme as long as we have access to our e-text again, and I do apologize for the difficulties you faced last week. Hopefully you got my message over the weekend. The issue should be resolved by early this week. But if you're still experiencing if you're still experiencing issues, please contact tech support and let them know, because the more people who complain, the faster they'll actually get to fixing our text. I'd also like you to read chapter 42, Writing About a Story, and I'm also going to ask you to read chapter 41, which is writing about literature, but I'll refer to that in a little bit. I'd like you to close read A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, and you can also listen to Flannery O'Connor herself reading this short story while you're reading. I found it really wonderful to hear her voice. Our week 6 conversation is going to be about theme and A Good Man is Hard to Find. This week I'll introduce your first paper, Writing About Fiction, which will be due in 2 weeks. And your reflection journal this week will actually be your pre-writing for the paper. So by the end of the week, you should feel comfortable identifying and critically analyzing theme in a short story. To begin with, I'd like you to watch the video on theme and read A Good Man is Hard to Find. Here's a creepy painting that's been done from the ending of A Good Man is Hard to Find. What do you think about what the title has to do with the story's theme? Why do you think Flannery O'Connor named A Good Man is Hard to Find, A Good Man is Hard to Find? Do you think it's because the actual phrase occurs several times throughout the story, and it's important while you're reading it that you pay attention to where it occurs. Also, thinking about the first paragraph of this short story, we meet the main character of the story, the grandmother, and we really learn everything that's going to happen in that story within the first paragraph. One thing that comes up in this short story that's really important to pay attention to, and which also came up in A Rose for Emily by Faulkner, was the idea of the Old South, the traditional South, versus the New South. So think about how Red Sam, the character Red Sam, thinks about this in this short story. I'd also like you to pay attention to the spectacular language that happens throughout the short story. One example of this is the way the woods play a role of really creating fear and in the story. So the line in paragraph 80, behind them the line of woods gaped like a dark open mouth. I think that's one of the most brilliant lines in this whole short story. The other thing to think about is the main character of this short story is the grandmother. We have lots of other characters, but the main character is the grandmother, and I want you to think about whether she's reliable or not as you're reading. Also, I want you to think about what happens in the end of the story. One of the last lines of the story is, she would have been a good woman if someone would have been there to shoot her every minute of her life. What do you think this statement means by the misfit? How does it relate to the plot of the story? I really want you to think about that because it really gives us a lot of information about what Flannery O'Connor is going for in this short story. So in your conversation this week, I want you to analyze theme in Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. How early in the story does O'Connor foreshadow what will happen in the end? What further hints does she give us along the way? How does the scene at Red Sammy's barbecue advance the story towards its conclusion. When we first meet the grandmother, what kind of person is she? What do her various remarks reveal about her? Does she remain a static character, or does she change in any way as the story goes on? And if so, how does she change? When the grandmother's head clears for an instant, this is in paragraph 136, what does she suddenly understand? What do we learn from the conversation between the misfit and the grandmother while the others go out to the woods? How would you describe the misfit's outlook on the world? Compare it with the author's from whatever you know about Flannery O'Connor and from the story itself. And just to clarify, guys, I want to make sure everyone understands. The theme of a story is whatever general idea or insight the entire story reveals. So one thing I want you to be thinking about as you're answering this question, all of these questions, is to really think about what is the general idea or insight that a good man is hard to find reveals, and how is it revealed as you answer these questions. There's a number of ways to find a theme in a story, and I really want you to do this work before you participate in the conversation this week. If you look at page 201, there's a list that asks you to look at the title of the story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. So thinking about, from what you read, what that indicates the theme is, looking to see if the main character changes over the course of the story, and if that character realizes anything or finds any understanding by the end. Does the author make any general observations about life or human nature? Do the characters make any? Does the story contain any especially curious objects, mysterious black characters, significant animals, repeated names, song titles, or whatever that hint at meanings larger than such things ordinarily have? In literary stories, such symbols may point to central themes. So, for example, when she's trying to find the house that she, the old plantation house that she wants to show her grandchildren, and she tries to get them to turn down a road to find it, and then realizes it's gone. What does that mean? What does that mean in regards to the main theme of the story? And then after you've gone through the story, whatever you feel the statement or the statement of the theme of the story is, make sure it works for the entire piece by the end, okay? Theme is really the backbone of the story, and you use other parts of the story. You use character, you use setting, you use point of view as a way to understand the theme. And we're going to be working on that when we write our first paper. Which brings me to your first writing assignment, your fiction writing assignment. As I said in the beginning of the class, we're going to be writing a paper for during the fiction segment of our class, during the poetry segment of our class, and then also during the drama section of our class. So your first formal paper for this class will be on writing about fiction. Over the past 6 weeks, you've gained the tools you need to effectively analyze a literary short story. The first thing you're going to do when you get your assignment is to actively read the story or stories you're going to be writing about at least twice. Then you're going to read chapter 41, which is all about writing about literature, and chapter 42, which is writing about a story. You're going to think about the story. You're going to identify the protagonist and main characters. You're going to consider the story's point of view. You're going to think about the setting. You're going to notice key symbols. You're going to look for the theme, and you're going to find examples from the text to support what you're saying, and use this literary terminology to talk about the text. Your pre-writing will be done in this week's reflection journal. You can also get prompt ideas, so different ideas on how to do pre-writing on pages 889 and 1889 and 1893. After you've done several different versions of pre-writing, you'll be required to do at least 2 for this week's reflection journal. I want you to develop a literary argument. And if you look on pages 1893 to 1895, the editors go into a really great description of how to do so. You're going to consider your purpose, and you need to make sure you're following the prompt that I give you to write your paper. You're going to remember your audience, that means me and sometimes your classmates. You're going to narrow your topic to fit the assignment. We're only writing a certain amount of words. And then you're going to decide on a thesis. Your thesis is the backbone of your paper, and it is really important that you are very, very clear in your thesis, telling us your topic and the purpose for writing your paper. You're going to build your argument using claims, persuasion, evidence, warrants, credibility. Then you're going to organize your argument so that you make it in the clearest way possible. You must support your thesis with evidence, and you will use quotations from the story to support what you're saying. You should, by the time you develop a literary argument, you should know what your essay's purpose is, who your audience is, if your topic's narrow enough, if your thesis is interesting and thought-provoking. You're going to make sure that everything in your essay supports your thesis, and that you've looked at alternative views and refuted them. You're going to make sure your tone is both academic and thoughtful, and make sure that your argument is sensibly organized, that similar ideas are grouped together, and one point leads logically to the next. Once you have that structure in mind, then you're going to draft a rough draft, and then once you have a good solid rough draft, you're going to revise and edit. So the timeline this week's, over the next 2 weeks, you're going to select your story, analyze and complete the pre-writing activities. That's this week. In week 7, you're going to draft your paper, and week 8, your final paper will be due at the beginning of the week. So your paper is to write an analysis of one of the stories written by Flannery O'Connor in Chapter 10, 2 Critical Case Books. You can write on any of her short stories except A Good Man is Hard to Find, where you can argue a theme. So you're going to be arguing a specific theme. A successful paper will contain a clear thesis, logical development, and the use of textual evidence, which means quotations, to back up one's claims, and the proper use of literary terminology. Your requirements are the papers need to be 3 to 4 typed pages in Times New Roman 12-point font. You need to use MLA format. If you have any questions about MLA format, please come see me in my office hours. The assignment needs to be uploaded as a Word document, and it is due October 6th at 11:59 p.m. For this week's reflection journal, you will be doing pre-writing for your writing assignment. Please choose 2 of the pre-writing exercises found in Chapter 41, Writing About Literature, either brainstorming, clustering, listing, pre-writing, journaling, and outlining. You need at least 2. But remember, you will have already done the steps previous to pre-writing before you begin. So these steps here, actively reading the story, reading Chapter 41 and 42, and thinking about the story. For all of these points, then you will do your pre-writing. Alright guys, that's it for this week. Next week is our last week of fiction, and we will be focusing on symbol. This date is wrong. Your fiction paper is due October 6th. Alright, I'll see you guys online. Please let me know if you have any questions.